I'm Buckner, your economics instructor. In this video, I'm going to use our basic introductory market graph to explain what shortages and surpluses are and how they're created. So first, a shortage is when the quantity demanded in a market is greater than the quantity supplied. So shortage is when quantity supplied is less than your quantity demanded. So in application, what that means is you've got a bunch of people showing up to stores trying to purchase stuff and they wind up selling out, right? So you've got a situation where some people are able to buy the product they want to buy, but then a bunch of people show up, try and buy it, they're sold out, they have to go home unhappy. So this is not a great outcome for either the sellers, which are represented by our basic upward slope supply curve, or for the demanders, right? So the sellers, they're missing out on potential customers, that's bad for them. And for the buyers or demanders, it's not good for them either because a good number of them are gonna show up trying to buy the product and have to go home empty-handed, right? So it's a disappointing experience for them. So let's talk about how that happens. So in most markets, it is up to the sellers or suppliers to wind up setting both the market price and also the quantity which they choose to produce and try and sell. And the way they do this is by estimating their own supply function, which is represented by this upward slope line, meaning that if they can charge a higher and higher price, they're willing to increase the number of units that they can make and sell. So for most firms and most industries, this supply function is pretty easy to estimate. But for a lot of products, particularly new or innovative products, estimating the demand can be a bit tricky, right? But firms need to do this to ultimately figure out the price they're going to charge and the quantity they're going to produce and try and sell. So a firm, when they're looking at their product, they need to estimate the demand for that product. And what they're typically going to see is some sort of downward slope function, right? This demand, we'll say this is our estimate for demand for the product. And once the firm has identified what their supply function looks like, they've estimated a demand function for the product, they want to find where those two functions cross right here, which we call our equilibrium point. And so the firm is going to use that information to set both the price for the product and the quantity supplied, the number of units they're going to make and sell. Now, they're anticipating that if they estimated this demand correctly and they got their estimation of their own supply correct, this quantity supplied should be equal to or in balance with the quantity demanded. That would be a great outcome. But in this particular instance, we're talking about a shortage, right? So what can create a shortage? The biggest thing, the most common thing that causes shortages is when firms underestimate the demand for their product. So this blue line here for demand represents the estimated demand. But what if it turns out the demand for their product is actually quite a bit greater, right? Instead of it being this blue line here, what if it were this green line here, right? What if this was the real demand? If that's the case, the real equilibrium point is not this blue dot here, but it is this green dot up here. That would be the real equilibrium point. And so what the firm should have done, they didn't do, but they should have done, is set their price higher, and they should have produced more units, right? That would have been the quantity they produced if in fact there had been a better estimation of demand for their product, but they didn't do that. So what's going to happen in this situation is the firm is going to choose to produce this many units right here. But at that price, you get this many people looking to buy the product, right? The quantity supplied is here, they're making this many units, but this many people show up and try and buy it. And that gap between here and here, the gap between the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded at the actual price they're charging, that gap is equal to your shortage for the product. Now, the other side, sort of the opposite of a shortage, is a surplus. I'm not going to graph that out, but a surplus is when a firm accidentally sets their price way too high, right? It should have been something lower, but they set it really high. That often happens as a result of overestimating demand, right? So in this example here, we had an underestimation demand, but if a firm were to overestimate the demand for their product, they're gonna wind up producing and trying to sell a lot more units than they're able to actually sell. So in a scenario like this, you have a situation where a firm makes a whole lot of units of a product, and then they deliver them to stores, and a few customers show up and buy the product, but some amount of the product just sits on store shelves unpurchased because they made too many units, at least too many units for how many they'd be able to sell at that given price.